He's studying vocal performance. Our first guest is an author, most recently, of Little Matches, a memoir of grief and light, published by HarperCollins in April. The story is inspired by a blog that she kept while her daughter Caitlin was waiting for a lung transplant. Please welcome Maryanne O'Hara. Marianne is joined by an author whose first novel was a Barnes & Noble Discover Award pick and spent 122 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Her second novel was also an international bestseller, and she is currently working on a new novel. Please join me in welcoming Kim Edwards. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, hi. I didn't check the mic. Thank you. I'm really happy to be in Kentucky. I've never been here before, and it's as beautiful as I heard it was. And Kim and I are going to have a little bit of a conversation, and people are out there having it too, so hopefully you can hear me okay. But first, I'm just going to share a little bit of my story via a little 10-minute narrative and slideshow, because I personally love visuals. And I'm going to start with a 1-minute book trailer. Should be loud. Should I try again? Okay. You should be able to hear the Blue Jays. It should be loud, but
Please feel free to move up closer, just in, so that you can all hear.
And you know, I can just skip the book trailer if the sound isn't going to work. Okay. That's too bad. Oh. Well, we can look at the pictures. I could probably even limp sync it by this point. I know it so well. I know. I'm saying that after I lost my daughter, Caitlin, I looked for revelation. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? And how I wrote Little Matches to look for answers to the big life questions. And how Caitlin was basically an old soul, and so much of her old soul wisdom is in the book. And a lot of her writing is in the book because the last 2 years of her life, it was easier to write than to speak while she was on oxygen and waiting for a lung transplant. And that's me saying all of her old soul wisdom is in the book in a really cool way. And also I'm saying, I know I'm not the first person to have lost what's most important to me. Humans lose all the time and lose hard. And Little Matches is for anyone who loses and asks, now what? So now here's my little talk. I spent my adult life writing fiction, but for decades, I had a stronger overarching identity, mother and caregiver to a sick child. Caitlin was born with cystic fibrosis, a genetic lung disease that predisposes those who have it to serious lung infections. Emergencies were frequent and unexpected. But CF is an invisible disease. So on the outside, Caitlin grew up looking like anyone else. We gave her the happiest, most regular of a life that we could manage. And we also made sure that she leaned into the magic of our brief human existence, that we exposed her to art and books and music and travel, the good in this life. If she woke in the night coughing, I would say, let's see which stars are out tonight. Since childhood, I had had a singular thought in the back of my own mind. We find ourselves here. We humans find ourselves alive with no explanation. Long ago, we emerged from our caves and turned so much of the natural world into everything that we now take for granted. Essentially, we are simple. We are cycle after cycle of creatures who are born, who live, and who die. But inside that period of life, that place where we find ourselves existing, there can be real magic and meaning. I hoped that Caitlin would grow up to embrace that magic and not let CF define her. And she did not. She interned at a Boston museum, graduated magna cum laude from Boston College, lived and worked independently, enjoyed close friendships and the love of a wonderful young man. But over time, chronic infections took their toll on her lungs. She reached the point that she needed a lung transplant, and we entered into the limbo of waiting for an organ donor. We hoped that transplant would happen within a few months, and we had every reason to hope that when she did receive her surgery, she would survive it. In fact, she waited for 2.5 years, and in the end, everything that could go wrong did. She existed, and then she did not. We people take up space, and when we're gone, there is a void. There is no rudder in that void, no anchor, no sail, no purpose. She was our only child, my person. I didn't think I would be able to live. I told myself that the only way I could survive the pain was if I knew I would see her again. The problem was I couldn't let myself believe that I would. I tried. I devoured the kinds of books she and I sometimes like to read and discuss, philosophy texts and books that we called soul books. We Don't Die, Many Lives, Many Masters, The Light Between Us. Those particular books were intelligently written, credible, and they provided comfort in the moment. Yes, they said, we birth into this life knowing at a soul level our life's plan. Yes, there is more to life than this life. But when I closed them, I was a human mother, sick with doubt and grief. In my fiction, I had always explored existential themes, but in a ruminating sort of way. Now answers were necessary. The only thing that helped was writing. I wrote on a blog I had kept during her final days in the hospital. Writing helped me feel connected to other people and to Caitlin herself. I shared her writings and my own. I wrote about how all I could do was flop from one surface to another and cry. That on the outside, I might have looked like I was functioning, but inside, I was on the floor. I wrote about how I would happily die if it wasn't scary and hard. I wasn't all despair and gloom, not at all. I wrote about our lifelong friendship, about our love of travel, and how we had lived on laughter, that great release valve. I wrote about the signs and synchronicities that marked my days when it seemed Caitlin might actually be trying to communicate with me. And I wrote about all the reflecting we had done on the reason anyone was alive in the first place. Caitlin often wondered, what is my role in this lifetime? We like to mull on those larger issues. And she often joked that if she hadn't had CF, she might have been shallow, which was her modest way of pointing out that she didn't think she was special. It was just that having to face your mortality makes you look at life and the world with a much broader and deeper perspective. She was right. People who face trauma, illness, or severe loss often find themselves transformed and come to question or better understand what life is really for. Writing on the blog was a way of grieving out loud, grieving in a way that other people apparently wanted to hear. I received a lot of messages from strangers who asked me to write a book. I had never been interested in writing the personal. But 9 months after her passing, during a walk around Thoreau's Walden Pond, I realized that writing the personal was the only kind of writing that mattered anymore. I knew I needed to write from smack inside the real of it. I needed to create a record. I wanted anyone reading it to understand how it was, and if they were going through something hard, to feel validated, to be able to say, yes, this is how it is, and to know they weren't alone. And for readers who weren't struggling, I wanted Caitlin's story to inspire. I was also conscious of the tendency of human memory to beatify a person in the years after death, so I didn't want to wait. I wanted to write Caitlin as she really was, write our story as it really had been. Who she was in real life was splendid enough. I wanted to share her wisdom, her humor, her example. I wanted to keep her alive. In the beginning stages, it felt impossible. It took me 2 months to write 10 pages. Then I began to set a timer and write for half an hour each day. The book became a book. It became my purpose for living. And as I wrote, I really did become every human who has ever looked for answers to those big life questions inside of books and science and in the natural world and inside of personal relationships. My writing became a recounting of that search. Where is she? Is she? Is there more to life than this life? Does my existence have any real purpose? Does anyone's? I found the process of writing memoir both easier and harder than writing fiction. Easier because I knew the pieces of the story. Harder because the personal was personal. So much of it was no different from writing fiction, though. You bring your people to life. You choose which details to include, how to shape the particular story you're trying to tell. The good thing was that the joy and magic of writing, the discovery, happened as I wrote the memoir, just as it always had with fiction. In the last blog post Caitlin ever wrote, she said, I want to reassure you, I don't take myself too seriously. I do take life seriously, though, I'll be honest, because it's a seriously wild business. I consider writing in all the arts to be serious, wild business. And I'm always mindful that with a book, I'm asking people to spend part of their life with me. So I'm conscious of the reader as I work. The memoir was somewhat cathartic, but I really wrote it to honor Caitlin's appreciation for life. And I wrote it to inspire and comfort people. I wrote it for people. So that's my little slideshow, and now we will talk.
Are we on? Are we on? Yes, we are. Good.
Hi.
Hi. Let's put this down. Well, thank you for that, Marianne. That was beautiful. And Caitlin really shines through in this book. I really admired the way that you brought her to life in a real way. I never had a chance to meet her. But she shines through the pages of this book, and she's shown through here. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. She would love to hear that.
Yeah. So the title of the book comes from Virginia Woolf, and I just wanted to read it for folks. The great revelation never did come. Instead, there were little daily miracles, illuminations, matches struck unexpectedly in the dark, which I think is a really beautiful quote and lovely to see in the title. So I'm going to come back to a lot of different things, and we're not going to spend too much time on structure, but I did want to, you talked just a minute ago about how the writing of the book came naturally as fiction did, although it was hard to write the personal. And I wondered a couple of things. First of all, the structure of the book starts in the middle of this terrible and devastating loss and plunges the reader into that experience with you, and then goes back to the beginning of your journey with Caitlin, and then into the aftermath after the transplant and her passing, and then includes a beautiful, well, they're woven through the book, but a beautiful section with writings from Caitlin and drawings and just really terrific little pieces in there. And I wondered if that structure came to you naturally, how much you had to struggle to get that structure, if it just sort of took its own shape.
It really did take its own shape. I was right inside real-time grief, and so I basically plunged the reader with me at the beginning of it. And I wanted it to be very close. I wanted a lot of white space. I wanted these like concrete, discrete feelings and emotions to happen for the reader as they were happening to me. But really, the overall arc of the book is not Caitlin growing up, Caitlin passing. The overall arc of the book is me dealing with the aftermath, dealing with her death and thinking, how can I go on? Is there any reason for living? So the arc of the book is me searching for answers to those big life questions. And I think I love structure. Writing a first draft can often be a tangled mess, but I love to, you saw how I had the pages all hung up. I love to see what I have and then put things together and make sure that I'm following the narrative arc of the story that I'm trying to tell.
And so was the narrative arc, did it become clear to you in the writing? Did you discover it through the writing, or did it emerge?
It did. And I must say that because I was writing in the very early days when I was still in devastating grief, that I don't have a lot of memory of some of the earliest days of writing, just that I was doing it and I was just putting one foot forward. But there was also a lot. I had pages and pages and piles and piles. I actually have another video that I sometimes show to like writers where it's January of 2018. I had been writing the book I had about 25 pages, but I had piles and piles of material. And it was in my guest room, going up the stairs, up in my third floor. And I took a video, and I would have forgotten it, except I found it on my iPhone. And it was January of 18, and I said to myself, if you ever manage to turn this into a book that's in any way decent and it becomes a real thing, I want you to remember how impossible it seemed on this day in January when you were just surrounded by piles, and it really seemed like, why don't you go back to that novel you were working on? Because it did seem impossible.
I got to know Caitlin first and you first. We met first when I wrote a quote for your wonderful first book, a novel called Cascade, which I recommend to everybody, and it's downstairs. But I also got to know you through the blog that you kept during the time. I think you started after you went to Pittsburgh, right? It's called 9 Lives Notes. And it's just it was a powerful experience just to read the blog, because you were keeping a a record of the hopes and fears of what was going on. And it was very candid and very direct. And again, like the book, is full of light too. So I wondered, how much you drew on the blog. I mean, the blog is not the book; it's a completely different thing. Right. So,
well, certainly the blog was the impetus for the book, because it was the only kind of writing I wanted to do. The only thing that made me feel better in those early days after her funeral, I would write a blog post and I would feel okay for the moment. And then getting the feedback from the blog was wonderful. I realized people were being helped by it. I've had people say amazing, wonderful things about how Caitlin's story, my story, was helping them. So then, of course, people are like, you should turn the blog into a book. Well, you don't do that. It does. I wish it worked that way. It doesn't. But it was certainly, I used a couple of blog posts in the book. I used some emails in the book, text messages, everything to sort of bring the past into the now. Because I also run this little legacy workshop, which I really enjoy doing. And one thing I say in that is there's something really wonderfully immediate about reading like chat transcripts. It brings the moment right back. And we're kind of lucky to have those, if you do have transcripts of your chats. Because some of Caitlin's friends will say the same thing, like, oh, I just spent, November 2015 with Caitlin, and we were talking about such and such, and I felt like we were right there again. It's a way of playing with time. I have an obsession with time.
Well, I know this wasn't your real purpose in writing the book, but I just wanted to mention that for me, I didn't enter the book or the blog knowing much about the whole system of getting transplants, waiting for transplants, the kind of excruciatingly long wait and uncertainties of not knowing what was going to happen. And I just wanted to say, I felt like, in addition to everything I learned about Caitlin, about you, about the depth of insights in this book, I also learned a lot about just the realities people are facing every day with that.
Exactly, and that's a big reason why I'm doing a 3-way medical talk And we'll be doing it at UK to the Grand Rounds program in January because people don't know. And I spoke to a narrative medicine class with a bunch of pre-med students last week, and it was just wonderful to get their feedback and say, okay, now I really get what it's like to live with CF from reading the book. And it really made me step into the shoes of a patient in a way I just don't when I'm in anatomy class studying the knee. So I think all of that is important, and I'm really happy to be part of all these different conversations.
Wonderful. So I wanted to talk, you mentioned it in your introduction, the synchronicities that you experienced. And I wanted to talk more about that because I think that there's so many different ways of knowing things in the world. And we tend, I think, in the Western world to focus on the intellect, the logical, and often to the expense of the intuitive. And yet we all have these experiences, I think, that you talk about in the book where two different things will happen and they don't seem causally related at all, but they resonate with each other in a way that feels important. Mm-hmm. Something will happen on a particular date or something symbolic in your life will happen. And I just, you have you sort of approach it with a very kind of almost skeptical eye at first, you say you can't make this stuff up. And then you talk at one point that the synchronicities are flying up at you like fireflies on a summer day or summer night. And I wanted to, they're wonderful to read about in this book because they resonate for me. I could recognize that kind of experience in my own life. And there's something kind of wonderful and magical about them. I wondered if you could talk about them.
The synchronicities were quite remarkable. And they actually started while she was in the ICU. And I took them to be, they're incredible signs that everything was going to be okay. I think they were telling me something else, but also not to worry. Sorry, I'm so easily distracted. Oh, is that man signing?
No, he's gone.
Oh, I'm so easily distracted. I apologize. Whenever I do a Zoom, everything's been on Zoom since this book came out. And my husband has to leave because if I just see him doing something out of the corner of my eye, I'm like a deer in the headlights and I lose my focus. And now I've lost my focus.
I was asking you about the synchronicities.
About the synchronicities. So what I do in the book is I write what happened. I don't interpret. I don't try to persuade. I just say, these are the things that happen. What do you make of them? One thing that's very interesting is Caitlin, for many reasons, and I won't go into them, but they were unfair reasons, had to move from Boston to Pittsburgh to wait for her lung transplant. And it was really hard. We left hoping that we would be back within weeks or months, and we were there for over 2 years. And right around the time, toward the end of our time there, a young woman from LA also could only go to Pittsburgh. And we were like ships passing in the night. I met her and her mom. Caitlin passed in December. Mallory was listed in February. The day my husband and I went out of our apartment to go pack it all up, we went back to Pittsburgh. It was the very day Mallory got listed. They were moving in. We connected even more, stayed in touch, introduced them to all the friends we had made in Pittsburgh who are now like life friends of ours and theirs. Mallory was transplanted. She was very tall, so she didn't have to wait long. She was transplanted in September, but 2 months later, she got a raging infection and did not survive. She had brilliant young woman, had been a writer. Her mom made sure her memoir, her autobiography was published by Penguin very quickly in 2019. Her mom's been going around the country talking. That's one part of the story. Mallory had been a student, full A student at Stanford. Her doctor was a guy I'd heard them talk about named David Weil. So in 2018, when I had those 25 pages, I was going to a teeny tiny writing workshop in Positano, Italy, 10 people in the memoir writing workshop. And I was reading the 25 pages of every of the 10 people. I got to the last pages and it was David. And I was like, I texted Mallory's mom and I was like, is this David Weil, your guy, Mallory's doctor, the guy who was the head of the cystic fibrosis transplant team at Stanford? And she said, yeah, why? I said, he's in my memoir workshop. And he was writing a memoir about his conflicted relationship with transplant and the way things are run. And so anyway, I knew then that was such a crazy coincidence, a synchronicity. You can't make it up. I knew then we would eventually be talking together. So the three of us are speaking. We've got a great talk that we are giving to Grand Rounds programs, the one we're giving it at Harvard next week, at Brigham and Women's next week. We're giving it at UK in January. We do it on Zoom, and it's the three of us talking about why medicine needs memoir and the importance of listening to people and listening to their stories, and also the importance of everybody on the team, because caregivers suffer too. So it's patient, Mallory, parent, me, provider, David. So that's just one synchronicity, but I've got a whole load of them. There are a lot of them in the book, and they're fun. And that's what I say. This personal talk that I give, I love giving the personal talk. And at the end, I basically say, synchronicities exist. I don't know how, I don't know why, but they do exist. And they can comfort you. They're part of the magic of this life that we find ourselves living. So why not enjoy them? Because people will come up to me and say, well, I've had this sort of thing happen to me. And I'm like, yeah, I hear people's stories all the time now. Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
There are a lot of them in the book, and I found them wonderful to read about. There are a lot of birds in the book that appear at crucial moments. And, I thought that Little Matches would be a difficult book to read. Even though I'd read the blog, I thought this would be a hard book. And I've had other people I've recommended it to say that too, that they went into it expecting a difficult read, but I didn't find it to be a difficult read at all. It was very gripping. And then there are these moments, Caitlin's presence, your voice, these synchronicities, they weave through it like threads of light, and they are really beautiful. And so I found the book not hard to read, very compelling, but not hard to read.
And I love hearing that, because that is what I aimed for. I did not write a book to make everyone feel terrible and sad and, down on life. I really want to inspire and uplift people.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely what happened for me. So
Thanks.
You also talk about, Caitlin seemed to me, just from reading about her, like a person who was very connected to people all around and in all the spheres of her life. And after she died, you reached, or maybe even sometimes before, you had some encounters with psychics and mediums. You were even, or you or one of your friends or someone you knew was recommended to go to a medium by a clinical psychologist. And
Mm-hmm.
so you started investigating, what is this about? And, is taking a critical eye at this, and also going into encounters with sort of a great deal of skepticism, but also had remarkable moments that happened there. And I found it fascinating that you wrote about it from a very scientific point of view, because there are people in the world with excellent academic credentials who are taking a look at these sort of intuitive things that we don't always acknowledge. And I just wondered to hear more. I loved reading about those too.
Yeah, as did I in the beginning. One of Caitlin's, not a close friend, so it was somebody she had really didn't even know that well, but had a connection with. And she said very early on, I'm seeing a medium. And I thought, I don't like this idea. I don't want to know that there's nothing. No, thank you. And she went, and I was really feeling uncomfortable with it. And then she left me a message and said, oh my God, it was amazing. I wrote about it in the book. And she said, Caitlin came through loud and clear, and I can send you the recording if I want. And, a lot of things she didn't know Caitlin all that well, so a lot of things she couldn't confirm. But when I listened to the recording, I certainly could. And then I don't know, that psychologist, Caitlin had a lifelong friend who was like her sister, who was like my other child. And she was experiencing severe depression. She had had a miscarriage, and Caitlin died. And this woman said, she was asking for an antidepressant. She said, I think you should see this woman. And she slipped the name across the desk, and Katie had been hearing about this woman, and she said, all right. And so again, the things were uncanny. So then I looked into that a little bit more, and I looked into the science of consciousness, expecting that there was hard proof that, consciousness cannot survive outside the human body, but it's what science calls the hard problem. So I had a lot of fun going down that rabbit hole. But in the end, I realized that nobody really knows much of anything. And you have to look for your own knowing, your own answers, really. So that's what I've done. I've written this book to show people what happened to me, and I like having an open mind, but also a skeptical mind. I mean, there are too many people who are willing, and there are plenty of frauds out there and all that, absolutely, and they ruin it for a lot of the good ones. Mm-hmm. But there is there are people who are trying to research the science behind, like this particular woman, Laura Lynn Jackson. She's a certified medium, and she's been blind tested, and there's a place called the Forever Family Foundation where they offer these services free to grieving people, and they're very, very careful with who they use, and so they blind test them. And I had talked about in this book, in my book, that I looked on their site, and they had, like, out of the whole United States, there were like 26 people that they deemed worthy of certification on the book, on the list. So there's still a lot to know. We are still so young as a human race, even if we are doing a lot of damage while we're here as youngsters. But there's so much more to know. I find it all fascinating. The fact that we're alive and exist, like I say, we find ourselves here. How did we get to be here?
Yeah.
We don't know.
It's a great mystery.
It's a wonderful mystery.
So during the course of, during the whole course of the book, you kept having this sort of feeling that, about your purpose, that your job was to sort of help people on to the next life. And then you got a lot of, you were talking about the messages you got from people, concrete messages in the world, talking about how much Caitlin's story and your story had moved them and influenced them. And so you are, you said they have this wonderful quote that I wanted to read. There are two quotes, actually. You first said, if my writing about Caitlin was going to serve a purpose, then I wanted to do it. And then in the preface to the book, you say, I came to focus on a few ideas, that purpose in life is necessary and probably a prerequisite to joy and contentment, that by acknowledging the inevitability of our mortality, we can actually better enjoy the time we are alive, that we are all connected, and that we all have work to do. And you are a novelist, and you were the fiction editor at Plowshares, I think, for many, many years. And so stories are woven into your life and so important. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit now about the work that you've gone on to do. You've mentioned some of it, but you told this wonderful story in the book about how you had gone back. You wrote a draft of a novel while you were in Pittsburgh, I think, and you put it aside, and then later you went back and you were reading through it. You sort of, and you needed to look something up in it, and you had written during that time.
Oh, yeah.
Oral histories are important. People need to tell their stories, and they need to have those stories heard, and humans need purpose in their lives. So you've talked about the work you're doing, going around and talking to the hospitals about narrative in medicine, and that's so important. And if you have anything more about that, but you're also doing legacy talks that I think are really important, and I think you're working with hospice patients sometimes too, to tell, maybe those are the legacy stories. But
well, the legacy stories sort of grew out of that. I had always wanted to do hospice. I've always been a volunteer, and I volunteered at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I always preferred to work with the really sick patients, but I wasn't quite ready for hospice. And then at the end of 2019, I trained to be an end-of-life doula, which is like a birth doula, only on the other end of the arc, and you provide support and comfort to dying patients and their families. And I was ready to begin hospice training in early 2020, and that didn't happen for obvious reasons. However, one of my favorite parts was writing, doing legacy work, helping people write their life stories. And you don't have to be at the end of life. As a matter of fact, I don't let anyone do it themselves or with a loved one long before you're at the end, because it's a great way to really think about what's important to you and what you would like your legacy to be, or what you want your legacy to be right now. You want to be living your legacy as your life should be your legacy. And helping people to find purpose in their lives is something that's meaningful to me. So I've been doing that on a volunteer basis, and I've been giving these workshops to like groups on Zoom, and that's been really nice. And I've made some amazing connections that way too. So I have to say, one woman, she's been in touch with me quite a few times now. She was a lawyer in New York, and her sister was dying, and she happened to hear about this legacy workshop I was doing through a Miami bookstore on Zoom. And she took it, and she said, it just like changed everything for me. And she spent the last 2 weeks of her sister's life, like doing a legacy project with her, working with her, just tending to her. She signed up for the same doula course that I took at UMass Medical School. And and she's starting that in January. And she said, and I'm done with being a lawyer. 20 years was enough.
That's wonderful. You know, we were talking earlier a little bit about that, you know, like my dad died 2.5 years ago, and I've just treasured having these little clips on his voicemail. You know, he left these little messages. They've been great to have. But I didn't do that kind of work. And I wish that I'd had sat down and had a sort of really focused conversation. I'm not sure how he would have responded to that if he knew I was doing it.
Right.
But I think it's wonderful to offer that and to offer people a path to figuring out how to do that.
And a lot of people are enjoying doing the questions for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, some people are tricky, and everybody's different. You have to know your subject for sure. But I say in my legacy talk that I really wish I had more of Caitlin talking and being, and then the same thing happened with my mother. She died last year, and I was going to do a legacy thing with her, and I sort of put in we always think we have more time. Mm-hmm. We should know better.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to close with one question. I want you to tell us about the Leo Project.
Oh my goodness. So this is another amazing story. So Caitlin's, like, she had a lot of best friends, but she had really deep, soulful friends. One of her best friends from high school, Jess, while Caitlin was waiting for a transplant in October of 2015, she was running a half marathon in San Francisco, had a lump in her breast. Anyway, she had stage 3 breast cancer while Caitlin was waiting for her transplant. So suddenly, Jess, went from being the person who was seeing the exact opposite of Caitlin, health-wise, to being sort of in the same boat. And it was very aggressive. Lumpectomy, came back, breast removal. And it was so aggressive that it's gone, but she's seen by her care team every 2 months without fail. But at Caitlin's funeral, she vowed to do something important in Caitlin's name. And she had long been back and forth to Kenya because she had always been drawn to Kenya since she was 18. And the plan was that after Caitlin's transplant, when Caitlin was well enough, and this was totally something that could have happened, Caitlin would go to Kenya with her. So she came to me in 2018 and with a little drawing of a rectangle and said, I want to raise $200,000 and build this resource center for children. And I said, yeah, we're on it, to help raise the money. But what happens if you don't raise the money? What if you raise 100? Well, how do you get the money back to people? And she just looked at me and said, that's not going to happen. And in January of 2020, she opened the Leo Project, which is named after Caitlin, Leo Project in honor of Caitlin O'Hara. And Leo means a lot. Stories in the book. But she opened it and they almost immediately it was an after school resource place for kids in the community. They had to pivot because of COVID, and she saw that there was just such a great need for a community health center where they were 4 hours north of Nairobi. So she's raised more money, and right now the Caitlin O'Hara Community Health Clinic for Women and Children is under construction in Nanyuki, and she came home. This one's amazing. She came home in July and took a 1-month intense global health class at Harvard School of Public Health, aced it, ran back to Kenya. She's coming home in 2 weeks to go to San Francisco to see her team, back to Kenya. And my husband and I are going to go in December and see it. I can't wait.
Marianne showed me a picture of it's the imagined drawing of how it's going to be. It's under construction now. It looks
the walls
amazing.
Are up.
Yeah, it's terrific. So
it's just incredible what one life can do and the connections we can make. Mm-hmm. Just makes me want to cry. I love it.
It's a wonderful project.
Thank you.
Anything more you want to say about the book that I missed?
No, thank you. Well, you've asked wonderful questions, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for the exposure to Kentucky. Yeah. And hi, anyone who's watching. So.
I want to close with a quote from Marianne's book. She says, "Grief and joy are both points on the spectrum of love." So,
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you both so much. At this point, we'd like to open the floor for a Q&A, if possible.
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I'm in awe at your strength and ability to talk about this. Did you find that the whole process of writing kind of got you incrementally to this point, or was there just something that was the switch flipped that you were able to kind of come out of the grief and deal with it and speak about it like you do.
Yeah, the real story is that it's up and down. That I cry just as much as I can get up here and talk and smile at everyone. And that is, the timeline of grief is not linear at all. And grief is always going to be with me. But for me, grief is talking about Caitlin. I don't want to not talk about her. She deserves to be, she wouldn't like that at all. She would love the fact that her face is on a book. She would absolutely love it. But yeah, I've just learned to incorporate it into my life because it's the only, if life was precious and I wish she was alive, then my life is precious too. Everyone's life is precious. So definitely connecting with other people and writing this book, I'm really glad I wrote it because connecting with people about it has just been really, really wonderful. And when people read it and give me feedback, it's the best. And I really did like writing fiction, but I really, really never realized how much I would like writing the personal. Not just for me in an egoistic way at all. It's the connection. Hi.
I'm not sure I understand synchronicity. Is that something along the lines of coincidences?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Seemingly, things that seem to be separate and shouldn't mean anything but do when they come together. Yes. They're fun.
All right. Well, thank you all for
very
joining
much.
us.